So now I'm going to move on today. Of course, like I said, I'm going to talk about the Israelites today first, which the Israelites are called all kinds of different names. Of course, Israelite, Hebrew, of course, often used also as well. Of course, today, of course, we know as the Jewish people, of course, as they're called, which you saw some of those people, of course, in Jerusalem, the capital, of course, the state of Israel, which now exists now in the Middle East. Now the Israelites as a people were originally from what is Canaan. That would be the area like around where Israel, Lebanon, and Jordan is today. Of course, they're known very famously for developing what we call Judaism. Judaism, of course, was one of the three Abrahamic religions that would develop. It was the first one, the oldest one. And of course, the other two you can see there were Christianity and Islam, which would develop later as a whole. And the Israelites, of course, had a chief god that they called their god Yahweh, which exists in the ancient Bible. Later in medieval times, Catholic, I think, priests or monks, of course, called Yahweh Jehovah, really Jehovah. That's how they said it. And so that became like the other name. I guess we've heard of maybe in modern times that's well known. And Christians kind of view Yahweh as being like kind of like almost like the same thing as basically Jesus, one and the same. I think pretty much that God sent, Jesus to the earth. At least Christians do, not Jews don't. But anyway, but most of their history, of course, of history of the Israelites, starts with, of course, the ancient Bible, the Old Testament, which the Christians call it. And got a few slides, of course, to share with you here if you want to look at them later in the PowerPoints I give you. This is, of course, a basic synopsis of all the history of the Israelites and the Jewish people, of course, later. The Old Testament or Hebrew Bible goes back a long way. I mean, it was written over hundreds of years. It's not something that was just, written in, one short period, but more or less written over a long period of time, like several hundreds of years. Of course, written in Hebrew, usually, of course, right to left. If you know about that, like if you ever looked at an actual Torah, everything is written right to left. They do think that they started somewhere in Mesopotamia and migrated, of course, into Canaan. At least that's the theory about maybe where the ancient Hebrews came from. Now, here's, of course, a picture of the Bible. Like of course, the Jews today don't call it the Old Testament. That, of course, is, like I said, a Christian name that's actually used. And the Jews today call it the Tanakh, which is a Hebrew name for what they call the three parts of the Old Testament, which is what they call an acrostic. It's actually, I'll put it on the screen for you, but it's basically made up of three parts: the Torah, Nevi'im, which is the book of the prophets, then the other minor writings also in the Old Testament, which is Ketuvim. So T and K, Tanakh, basically. And in the first five books, you see, of course, the most famous of Jews today, which is the Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. It's what they call the Torah, the law. And of course, they often call that the five books of Moses. That's one of the nicknames that they sometimes call, the Torah, because the belief was that a long time ago it was written down by Moses. At least that was the tradition for many, many, many centuries. Well, it's kind of debated now. And Greeks later call it Pentateuch, which means in Greek 5 books. So the 5 books of Moses they're talking about. And so that's of course the name. But of course Christians later call it Old Testament because they have the New Testament that they add later. So they call the other one Old. So I kind of talking about the background of the Bible, and so that's where they get a lot of the information about a lot of the early history of the Hebrews, and of course going down to like the kingdom of Israel, etc. Now I need to talk about the book of Genesis. That's of course very important as well, and we need to talk about the patriarchs. These of course are the famous figures in the Bible that first developed early Judaism in what is now Israel today. Those, of course, are the three oldest that are the most important: Abraham, Isaac, and of course Jacob. And of course, they date back many, many years. The term patriarch you see is a term meaning great father. And Abraham was seen as the father of many nations. He was believed to have originated, they think, somewhere in Mesopotamia, where possibly Ur is. They think Ur is likely the city he came from. Then he migrated westward to be in Canaan. He was promised the land of Canaan by God. And he went there with his wife, Sarah. And so Abraham was important. He was seen as the first father of early Judaism. He was the one that got the early Hebrews to stop worshiping idols and only worship one God, which would be like Yahweh, basically. They also had Isaac. Isaac, of course, was the main son, of course, of Abraham, through Sarah. And so the Jews today trace their lineage back through Isaac. That's why Isaac is very important. Also, Abraham did have another son named Ishmael, who was through a handmaiden named Hagar, and his name was Ishmael. And Ishmael is how the Arabs trace their lineage back. Of course, they believe the Arabs are related to Ishmael, the other son of Abraham. So in a sense, the Jews and the Arabs are kind of like half brothers, more or less. Also, they got Jacob, of course, the third one. Jacob was the son of Isaac. They also had Esau as well. And he's very important, Jacob, who they also call, by the way, Jacob was called later Israel because he was seen as the father of the 12 tribes of Israel that would be, of course, formed from his sons. And these are the 12 tribes, of course: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Benjamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, and Joseph. Also, Joseph was later split into two half tribes, which are called Ephraim and Manasseh as well. So anyway, so it's kind of talking about the early, Hebrews, which are later referred to as being called the Israelites. And I've got other slides if you want to look at later. Of course, they go more into some detail overall about them. And I'll also talk about, of course, the story of Joseph. That's also well known in, of course, the book of Genesis. So all this, of course, occurs, in the book of Genesis. Now later, the Hebrews or Israelites, they eventually migrate. They leave Israel. In the Bible, they talk about the fact that there were great famines that occurred at the time, and that forced a lot of the Hebrews to leave and go to Egypt. It's believed that maybe, at least theory-wise anyway, they think that the Hebrews may have come into Egypt around the 17th century. Some people do connect it to the so-called Hyksos invasion that occurs in Egypt, where Asiatic Semitic peoples, took over Egypt at one point. This is a story that's mentioned by the author Josephus through this Egyptian writer named Manetho, and he kind of thinks that maybe Josephus thought that maybe the Hebrews and the Hyksos may have been somehow related, more or less. So it might be connected to the whole story of Joseph, maybe. So now Joseph, by the way, was a favorite son of Jacob. Now, his brothers were very jealous of him. He was famous for having the so-called, you see, coat of many colors that his father Jacob gave him. So that really angered them. And then if you know about it, Joseph had this knack for interpreting dreams. Like if you told him what your dream was, he'd be able to tell you what it was about. That really made him mad too. And so his brothers eventually sold him into slavery when some merchants were coming through, I guess through caravan routes that ran towards Egypt. And so they got rid of him. And so Joseph ended up, of course, in Egypt afterwards. What, of course, occurs is that Joseph, if you know about it, later would become this powerful vizier, which is kind of like a chancellor or prime minister under one of the Egyptian pharaohs. They're not sure which one it was because the Bible doesn't really say much about it. But he's eventually, over time, reunited with his brothers and also Jacob as well. Jacob was the only early patriarch that was buried in Egypt. So it's one of those stories that kind of bridges the whole, period between, the Hebrews being in, Israelites being in Canaan, and then them being in, of course, Egypt, more or less. Now, of course, let me get to the other big story I need to get into, of course, and that's the story of Moses, the book of Exodus, the second book, of course, in the Old Testament, the Torah. And, of course, the Exodus story, is very famous. It's about the Hebrew prophet Moses, of course, the greatest prophet in Judaism. And, of course, he's, famous for being helped by God in freeing the Israelites from bondage, slavery under the Egyptian Pharaoh. They don't really know who the Pharaoh was. I know we've talked about the fact that maybe it could have been Ramses the Great, which they've always talked about. The Bible does not say who the Pharaoh was. But Moses is a very, very important figure, not just being the greatest, prophet in Judaism. He, of course, influenced Christianity. They think he influenced Islam. He's considered the so-called great lawgiver who, created basically what we call Mosaic law. And, of course, the guy that wrote down the 10 Commandments that everybody's, of course, heard about. Later, of course, what happened in, of course, the Exodus story was that Moses later was able to free the Israelites via God due to the so-called 10 plagues that were put on Egypt. And you see the 10 plagues up there. The river turned to blood, frogs, lice, flies, pestilence, boils, hail and fire, locusts, darkness, of course, the death of the firstborn also as well. The 10th plague, is the one that's the most famous, of course, of, the Exodus story of Moses and all that. And that was, of course, the death of the firstborn male, where Moses was told by God to put lamb's blood on everybody's houses to prevent the angel of death from killing them, their firstborn male. Of course, the Egyptians wouldn't do it, and so all their firstborn males died. Of course, the 10th plague, of course, is where they get the term Passover, Pesach, of course, which became eventually a famous Jewish holiday over time. That's where Jews today celebrate, of course, the Exodus story of the Israelites being freed from bondage, which happens, of course, every spring. Moses then took, of course, the Israelites, the Hebrews, crossing the Red Sea into the Sinai Peninsula to where's Mount Sinai. Whereas Mount Sinai, it's kind of debated today, but of course, in modern times, they believe it's on the southern part of the Sinai Peninsula and eastern part of Egypt. There's different names for it. Arabs today call it Jebel Musa, which means the mountain of Moses, pretty much. Also, the Bible does mention as being also called Mount Horeb. So it has multiple names. There's even theories that it was not there. They think maybe it's possible that the mountain could have been more in maybe closer to Saudi Arabia. Has been debated. That might not be where it is. But of course, today they think it's there. So anyway, talking about Mount Sinai. Of course, Moses had already been there before because he had been exiled from Egypt to the land of Midian. And they think that's where it was, the so-called land of Midian, supposedly. Moses also was famous on Mount Sinai, of course, for writing down the Ten Commandments. They do think Moses may have also started writing down some of the parts of the Torah, also what they call the oral Torah, like the so-called Talmud. That'll be later is believed to have been, they think, originated by Moses, like a long time ago, which the Ten Commandments, of course, were written on 2 stone tablets. And then they, of course, were put into the Ark of the Covenant. And the Ark of the Covenant was this small wooden chest that God told Moses to build, which would house, of course, the famous 2 tablets of the Ten Commandments. And they were later placed in what they call the Tabernacle. The Tabernacle originally was this mobile tent that the Israelites built. And everywhere they went, they would take it with them because early in their life, they were kind of very nomadic people living in the deserts. And the Israelites believed that the divine presence of God lived in it, which was called the Shekinah, they called it. And later it was referred to as being called the Holy of Holies. This would later be, of course, in the Temple of Solomon, that they would build this tabernacle where, of course, the Ark of the Covenant would go into. Now, the Israelites would eventually return to Canaan. However, it was done by Joshua. Joshua was mostly a military leader that was under what was Moses. In fact, Joshua had been one of the spies that had been sent into Canaan to kind of study what was there. Him and I think Caleb and some other ones that went in there. And they came back and told Moses that it was the land of milk and honey, that they ought to go and settle there. And so Joshua, who was their main leader later, and also a very famous general, was famous for conquering part of Canaan, especially Jericho, which was seized in a series of wars. And so Jericho became one of their first cities that they would found, Israelite city later. Now, over time, though, they would form eventually a kingdom out of this area of what is Canaan. This became known as the United Kingdom of Israel. The United Kingdom of Israel. And they think it formed in the 11th century. At least that's the belief about it. They only had at least 3 major kings, which you see there, which were Saul, David, and Solomon. Those are the 3 main kings that they had. And then over time, it broke up. You can see after the death of Solomon, it split into 2 separate kingdoms, a northern and southern kingdom, which I'll get to later. I do have maps showing you the different states at one point. So Israel as a state, the United Kingdom anyway, existed really about where Israel is today, and also part of Western Jordan. So it kind of, they think, went across where the River Jordan was, around the Dead Sea. You can see all the different enemies that are around them that, of course, didn't like them too much. Philistines being one of their main enemies, which was over here. Of course, I'll go through the different kings real quick. They were very famous in the United Kingdom of Israel's history. The first one they had was Saul. Saul was from the tribe of Benjamin, and Saul was the one that united the tribes as basically as one state. So there he is right there. They believe that Saul lived in the late part of the 11th century, and he was probably the least successful of the three major kings that they had. He later died in battle. I think it's the Battle of Mount Gilboa, and he was killed in battle against the Philistines. I think he actually killed himself. That's what really happened. So you had Saul, he was first. Next, they had King David, who was also a writer. He wrote part of the book of Psalms as well. And David was the actual son-in-law of Saul. He had married one of his daughters. He was also a famous general. If you know about David, he was famous in his youth for killing the Philistine giant Goliath. I heard that story where he killed a Philistine giant with a slingshot, which was later made into a famous statue by Michelangelo. It's well known. And he would go on. Of course, you saw in the little short video at the beginning, but he's the one that would found Jerusalem. That would become eventually the capital of the kingdom of Israel. And he was more known for his military exploits. He was, very successful fighting against the Philistines, killed and captured a lot of Philistines. Like I said, he was also known as a writer. He was also known for his wife. His wife was, of course, Queen Bathsheba. He was supposed to be very beautiful. Also, they had, of course, King Solomon. He was the last and third king, of course, of the United Kingdom of Israel. And if you know about Solomon, he was believed to have been very smart, like very wise. They talk about how wise he was, also how wealthy it was. Although he's kind of controversial because of his high taxation that he put on the Israelite tribes, which later led to the actual kingdom splitting after he died. So he's the peak ruler. He rules about mid to late 10th century BC. And of course, his most famous feat that King Solomon did was he was the one that built the Temple of Solomon, which is the first temple of Jerusalem, which maybe the Wailing Wall is like the remnant of it, which you can see in the background of me. That's the Wailing Wall, or so-called Western Wall, they think, and which is part of the Temple Mount that's left over from the old temple that was there a long time ago. But he constructed it, and it'll be around until the 6th century when it's destroyed by the King Nebuchadnezzar when he would sack the city. Right, like I said, what would happen was that the state would split up. Like after Solomon died, maybe close to 922 BC, what occurred was that 10 of the tribes decided to break away and form their own separate state. And I'll go through the two tribes real quick, but the two tribes were basically, in the north, the two states were basically the kingdom of Israel, which was based at Samaria, which became their capital. And then the other one was the kingdom of Judah, which was based at Jerusalem. So you have these two states, north and south, northern Israel, southern Israel, basically. And they had two different rulers that were part of it. The first one was Jeroboam. Jeroboam was the ruler of the kingdom of Israel. He was actually a minister that was under King Solomon that decided to break away with the tribes and form their own state, and they did. And then the other one, which is King Rehoboam, the kingdom of Judah, he was actually one of King Solomon's sons. And supposedly Solomon had a lot of sons, if you know about it, because he had a lot of women. That's one thing that Solomon was known for, like 300-something women and concubines, or something, supposedly in the Bible. But they think that after Solomon died and Rehoboam came in, the whole state split. to these two rival states. And the two never got back together. They never did. What happened in both states, by the way, both states over time were conquered by other powers that were just more better than they were. And Israel, which was based around Samaria, the northern state, was eventually destroyed by the Assyrians, close to probably about 722 BC or so. They were overwhelmed by the Assyrian Empire under, I think, Sargon II and his father, Tiglath-Pileser III, were the ones that mostly destroyed them. And then about a couple centuries later, Judah, based around Jerusalem, it was sacked and destroyed by King Nebuchadnezzar of the Chaldean Empire, that one that I told you that was later called the New Babylonian Empire. That occurred about 587 or 86 BC. So then about 2 centuries, both states fell to just more powerful empires that were in Mesopotamia. The remnants of Judah, if you know about it, were forced into captivity by King Nebuchadnezzar. It became known as the Babylonian Captivity, which I think would go on for 40, 50 years or so, where they were forced to live in Babylon. And so the remnants of the people afterwards were called the Jewish people or Jews, hence the term Judaism being used because of the kingdom of Judah. Afterwards, most of the Jewish people are forced to live under other foreign powers, especially the Greeks, when the Greeks come in, I think first originally. Then later they also live under the Romans as well. They do go back, the Jews do go back to Israel. They rebuild the temple. They have the second temple that's also built, which I believe that one was built close to about 516 BC. It's when they constructed that one. And that one will be around for 500-600 years before it's destroyed by the Romans. The Romans sack it again. That leads to the famous diaspora, where the Jews are dispersed, all over the Mediterranean region. That's why the Jews all end up in Europe later. Basically, a people without a country until modern times. So the Jewish people don't really get another state, I guess you could say, until after World War II and the Holocaust happens. And so that's partially why they created the state of Israel, was because of the persecution of Jews worldwide, which there's a lot of people that still hate the Jews today. All right, let me go ahead and move on. Of course, I'll quickly review, and then we'll spend a few minutes also talking about, I'll talk about India a little bit today. I don't know how far I'll get on India, but I'll at least start on India. Who are the Israelites? The Israelites were, of course, I'll call the Hebrews or the Jewish people later. These were, of course, Semitic peoples that developed Judaism later, which they were based originally where Canaan is, where the modern state of Israel mostly is. Monotheism was a type of religion based on one God. The Israelites, of course, were famous for popularizing that, which became Judaism, and then Judaism led to Christianity, and Christianity led to, of course, Islam later. What is the Hebrew name used by Jews for the entire Old Testament? They call it the Tanakh. The Hebrew name for the 5 books of Moses is the Torah. Of course, the Old Testament is the Christian name of the whole Hebrew Bible. Who are the 3 early patriarchs in Genesis? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I wouldn't worry about knowing all the 12 tribes. I don't care about that. Which son of Jacob was enslaved in Egypt by his brothers? That was Joseph. And of course, that's believed to be the story that connects how the Israelites or Hebrews, came to be in Egypt. What was the story of the Exodus? The Exodus story was how Moses, with the help of God, was able to free his Israelite brothers from bondage, from slavery. It was all because of the so-called 10 plagues that were put on Egypt. Who was the main hero that freed the Israelites? It's easy, Moses. And of course, Moses is considered to be the greatest prophet in Judaism. the one that created Mosaic law and, of course, the Ten Commandments. What is Passover? Passover is a Jewish holiday celebrated every spring. And it celebrates the Exodus story where Moses and God, of course, freed the Israelites from bondage. What mountain did Moses bring the Israelites to where the Ten Commandments were written down? That, of course, Mount Sinai. What was the Ark of the Covenant? It was a wooden chest that God told Moses to build to house the two tablets of the Ten Commandments. And, of course, it was later put into the Holy of Holies, the Tabernacle. Who were the main kings of the United Kingdom of Israel? I told you King Saul founded the state. Then you had David, the son-in-law, came in next, who was a famous general. And then you had King Solomon. So that's pretty much it. Solomon was known, David was known for mostly, his most famous thing he did was he founded the capital of Jerusalem. And then Solomon's known for, of course, building the Temple of Solomon. What two kingdoms formed after the death of Solomon? Remember, you had the northern state that formed, which became known as the Kingdom of Israel. It was based around Samaria. That was formed by that ruler named Jeroboam. And then the other state was the Kingdom of Judah in the south, based at Jerusalem. And it was, of course, ruled by Rehoboam, who was the son of Solomon. What happened to both states, the Jewish people? Both states were destroyed by other states. The one of Israel, based around Samaria, was destroyed by the Assyrians in the 8th century BC. And then the one of Judah, the kingdom of Judah at Jerusalem, was eventually destroyed by the Chaldean Empire of the Babylonians of Nebuchadnezzar. Of course, the Jews ended up, of course, in captivity and survived later as the Jewish people. All right, so that's pretty much it for talking about the Israelites. Now, I've got a few minutes. I'm going to, of course, move on to talk about ancient India next. So I'm going to get into that as well. I've got a few minutes. I don't know how far I'm going to go exactly, but I am going to start a little today, just kind of talking about some background on India. I'm not going to finish it all today, but I'll finish it on Monday next week. Now, India overall is, of course, I've talked about this before, it's the second oldest of the river valley civilizations, based in, of course, what we call South Asia. It's like right above the Indian Ocean is where it's at. It's kind of between, like, to the east, you've got, China and all that, and Southeast Asia. And to the west, you've got Afghanistan and Iran. And it's based around two major rivers. Of course, the Indus River, which is more important. And then it's got, of course, the Ganges River as well, which is kind of in the eastern part of the region of India as well. Now, why do they call it India? There's different, of course, reasons for that, which I'll, of course, get into today. The modern name of India comes from the word Indus, like the Latin term, like the name of the river, which is located mostly in Pakistan and part of northern India. And then they have a Sanskrit name, too, if you want to know, which is called the Sindhu. So Sindhu is the Sanskrit name for the same river, the Indus River. But most of the Indian name comes from that. But you can see also the fact that the word Hindu, like the word Hindu in Hinduism, is kind of derived from a variation of those two words. Today, India is actually not called that. The actual name they use for the Republic of India is Bharat or Bharata, which is believed to be a type of, was an ancient ruler of India that ruled like a long time ago. And so they named India after him. So that's where the name comes. That's what they call India today, Bharat or Bharata. Get into some geographic features about India, which are kind of important overall. Geographically, India, if you know much about it, it's not a big area. It's 1.2 million square miles in size. I believe it's close to, I want to say, a third the size of the United States, if you compare like us with them overall. but it does have the second largest population in the world. 1.3 billion people live in India itself, like the country. And I guess you throw in the Pakistan and other countries, you got even more, like 1 to 2 billion, people actually living there. China's like 1.4 billion, which is even more people. And India has a nickname. It is often called the Indian subcontinent or just the subcontinent. Why is it called that? Well, it's because of the fact that India is kind of subdivided off by mountain ranges from the rest of Asia. You got all these mountain ranges that are kind of above it. They help kind of subdivide it off. And if you look at it from outer space, like maps, you can see like this huge diamond-shaped peninsula with a bunch of mountains on top of it. That's kind of what it looks like, usually like Google Earth, etc. Overall. Yeah, those are the mountains that are kind of in the north. You can see them up there. Hindu Kush, kind of in the northwest up there. And then you have also the Himalayas as well, which are also up there as well. So both of those are the two main mountain changes that kind of divide off India from the rest of the area of South Asia. Now, talk about ancient India. Ancient India itself was made up of multiple states like a long time ago. If you know much about India, it was broken up around the 20th century, like especially around 1947. You've got the partition of India that happens, like especially when Pakistan and India kind of divided. Those are like kind of like the main parts that kind of make up what was kind of considered like ancient India a long time ago. They go from like the Indus River, you can see on the left in that map, all the way to the Ganges River to the right, to the east. And Republic of India, Bharat, of course, Bharata, Pakistan, just to the northwest. You've got Bhutan, which is to the east of India, Nepal, which is north of India, Sri Lanka, which is a little island nation, which is off the coast, which you can't see, but it's on the bottom of India. So those are all the different countries that, or at least regions today, that now make up, mostly what we call India now. Now, also that northern part, you're looking at where the rivers are. There's another picture. And here's, by the way, a picture showing you like where all these countries are. So all this from here, Pakistan over here, New Delhi, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Bangladesh, Bhutan, all those were at one point considered part of ancient India. Burma, not really considered part of that. But all the area of India is mostly from like the Arabian Sea over here to the Bay of Bengal with the Indian Ocean on the bottom. So as you can see, it's like got this, diamond-shaped peninsula, of course, that it's known for, the so-called subcontinent of India. They also famously, geographically, have the so-called Indus-Ganges plain, also called the Indo-Gangetic plain. And this is basically the area of what we call northern India, which is dominated by those two rivers that we're talking about. That area is a very fertile plain. You see in that kind of lighter yellow that goes from west to east. It's about 2,000 miles from Pakistan all the way to Bangladesh. It goes from the Indus River basin all the way to the eastern part of where the delta of the Ganges River is. And like it says there on the bottom, about 1 billion people live in that area, with I think New Delhi being one of the most populated cities that's in the northern part of India. So all that area is very important. If you study about ancient times in general, a long time ago, that's where farming started. Like agriculture took off originally in the Indus River basin. Like if you go on this map here, up in this area where that kind of like red area, little red area up in here, that area is where farming started. And it progressed eastward down through the Ganges River and then spread to the rest of India over time. Also, it's where the first civilization started. Like in the Indus River Valley, I'll get to the Indus Valley Civilization. It was believed to have started there a long time ago. Today, that area is still important for farming. I think they do a lot of their majority of farming throughout that area. And so those areas are very like fertile valleys for farming in general. There's an area on the bottom, which I don't think I've got a picture of that, but if you look at that area, it's kind of an orange area, which is on the bottom of the peninsula, like in the actual diamond shape on the bottom. That area is called the Deccan Plateau. It's kind of a flat area that runs from like below the Indus Ganges plain down to the bottom of the peninsula. And I think it's like 600 feet above sea level, like up here, and it goes all the way down to the coast, basically, to almost sea level. So it's kind of a flat plain area of India. And in the northern part of India is more hilly and mountainous as you get closer to the Himalayas. One more thing about India, which is very famous today, and they're just coming out of it, like probably last month. But India is very famous for its monsoon season, like the summer monsoon, which is often called the Southwest Monsoon. I think it's what meteorologists call it, actually. It's a major part of their climate, and it affects agriculture, like pretty much every year. And basically what it is a bunch of rainy seasons that happen in India, which occur pretty much in Asia, Africa, Southeast Asia. They have all these rainy seasons that happen pretty much in the summer. What happens is rain comes off the Indian Ocean from kind of like a southwesterly motion. It goes like this way into India. It brings in rainstorms for like several months. I think I've got the months being from July to September when they have the bulk of the monsoon season. So basically for about 3 or 4 months, they get all these rainstorms. And the reason why the summer monsoon is real important is because India gets about 80% of its precipitation during that time. So you can imagine that affects, their overall agricultural output. If they had a shortage of rain where it didn't rain that much, it could actually lead to droughts, famine, things like that, which was a problem they had in ancient times. Some people even think that may have been the reason why the Indus Valley Civilization declined, because of maybe like bad monsoon seasons and all that. Of course, it can do the opposite, where it could, a lot of rain, too much rain, and that can cause a lot of rivers to flood and also wipe out villages and cities, which is common still. Like in Pakistan, they have problems with that, with sometimes the Indus River flooding because of the monsoon season. They do sometimes get hit by cyclones, like we get hit by hurricanes, in the Gulf Coast in the United States. And they call them cyclones instead of hurricanes. And they have actually had tsunamis, too, that have hit the region as well. They had that one in 2004 you may have heard of, called the Boxing Day tsunami. That was really awful. That killed like a lot of people, like several 100,000 died. So they sometimes get those, like in the Indian Ocean region, occasionally. All right, I got a few minutes left. Let me talk about one more thing, and I think that's it for today, lecture-wise. Let me talk about also the Indus Valley Civilization that also develops in India. I've got different pictures of it. You want to look at it, of course, later, the PowerPoint slides. The Indus Valley Civilization was believed to be India's first civilization. It's the oldest civilization as far as they know from archaeological evidence that's been done over so many years, in the past century or so. The Indus Valley Civilization is called different names. You see the other name was also called, they call it also the, not that one, the Harappan Civilization is the other name that they dub it. And I'll explain why they call it that in a second. But the IVC or Indus people, call it all kinds of names, were a type of Bronze Age culture that they think was around the same time as Mesopotamia. It's often been kind of compared with that other civilization. And it was mostly based, as you can see in that map, around Pakistan. It was in part of Afghanistan, part of also western and northern India. So it's kind of like based around the Indus River Valley. And so they call it the Indus Valley Civilization. And the civilization was not discovered until the 19th century. It looks like in the 1850s it was first found. And they found these mud brick cities that were built. There was one called Harappa, you see in that list. And so they call it the Harappan civilization. And they didn't really begin excavations until like the British started looking into it more. I think British archaeologists really were the ones that first started a lot of the excavations in India. And what they found was all these different mud brick cities that existed all up and down the river valley of the Indus. And the two most famous they found were Harappa, and there was also another one that was called MOHENJO-DARO. That one's the one that's probably more famous. They think it was the largest one of the different cities that was actually built. MOHENJO-DARO is a name that means either Hill of the Dead, or I think another translation is also Mound of the Dead. And MOHENJO-DARO was found in the southern part of Pakistan today. And Harappa was found in the northern part of Pakistan. So that's about the location of where they were. 40,000. That's about how large at the biggest like some of these cities were. I think MOHENJO-DARO, like I said, was the largest one that was ever built. And that one is the most famous for all the different archaeological digs and also some of the reconstruction that's ongoing at the site today. And just about all these cities that we're talking about that were built by the Indus people were built on a grid system where the roads in the buildings all crisscrossed each other, like most cities do overall. I'll show you some pictures in a little bit, and they do think they had multi-level buildings, all made of mud brick that were constructed. Those are all the kinds of technology that were very famous that they found at a lot of these Indus Valley cities. Evidence of drainage systems. There was actually sewage systems where they drained sewage away as well. Granary sites were also found. Use of flush toilets was well known. Wells and baths. They even found a writing system that they call Indus script, which is believed to be some kind of pre-Indian type of writing system that is kind of undecipherable at this time. I do got pictures, of course, of the Indus Valley civilization. Here, of course, some ruins at MOHENJO-DARO, which is in southern Pakistan, which they've kind of basically, looks like they pretty much rebuilt. That's all been reconstructed, I believe. Here's some other pictures kind of showing like how it's kind of built on a grid system with kind of roads between them. They have a citadel they'll talk about as well that was also built there. They have granary sites I told you about at the site as well. And this is really considered to be one of the most famous features, of course, at the Indus Valley Civilization city of MOHENJO-DARO. These one of the two things anyway. Of course, the Great Bath of MOHENJO-DARO is believed to be some kind of ritualistic bath. They think that may have been constructed, that may have been part of a temple complex. It was a public bath, considered one of the oldest ever built in the world. Whether it was heated or not, I don't know about that. But it is considered to be one of the most famous features ever found at that site. The other one is that citadel that I just showed you. Thought I had another picture of it in the background. I don't think I do. The citadel. But you can see back here in the background, there's a citadel just right here. They do think that was maybe used for some kind of fortification that they had to defend the city, more or less. They peaked over like 1,000 years or so, and they believe that what happened was over time, I think they seem to think that maybe If you go back to this thing up here, they think probably before that, probably before 1300, more like maybe 1600 BC. I think that seems to be the real time of maybe when the culture probably declined. So at least somewhere around here, 1600 BC at the latest, they may have declined as a people. Let me talk about the theories on that, about what happened to them. The Indus people in their decline has been often compared with the Maya, the Minoan civilizations that kind of vanished overnight. And there's all kinds of theories on what happened to the Indus people. One, of course, they always talk about is climate change, which I just kind of already mentioned about. And of course, one theory, of course, is that they think that it may have been caused by a combination of like drought, that likely was because of like a lack of monsoon rains. So maybe the monsoon seasons slacked off. There weren't as much rain coming, and so that caused like drought. Of course, there's another theory they come up with too, that the Indus River changed course. That may have also caused the same thing to happen as well. So the river changed course. Then, of course, the other theory they always talk about, which is very famous, is that what happened eventually was that they were conquered by invaders, which I'll be getting more into this later, but they have the so-called Aryan migration, where Caucasian peoples eventually migrate into India, and they conquer India. They take it over. And the Aryan peoples were Caucasian peoples, you can see, that originated in southern Russia. And they eventually migrated all over the world into Europe. They came into Southwest Asia. They came into Central Asia, like into India. And they were very aggressive, very militaristic, the Aryan peoples. And they think that the bulk of a lot of the people in India today are somehow related or descended from them. That'll eventually come in. And so that's a very popular theory on why the Indus people came to a decline real quick, just like the Minoans that got snuffed out, or the Mayans declined, like in Latin America. So I think that's it for today, lecture-wise. Of course, later on Monday next week, I'll continue talking about ancient India. I have like a part 2 lecture on India. I'll probably finish up with on Monday. And then, like I said, reminder-wise, I've got a lot of assignments that I've got on Canvas. The two main ones you need to work on now, of course, is the Mesopotamia quiz and the Egypt video quiz. Don't forget also you've got the vocab assignment, the new one that I've got posted as well, that you got to work on. The first key terms vocab, of course, due next week. So don't forget about that. Also, if you have any time, if you want to go ahead and start on early, if you're finished with other stuff, you can start working on the online first exam that I've got on prehistory, Mesopotamia, and Egypt, because that's going to be up for a while, probably into week 4. I'll leave it up to like, I guess, November 2nd, Monday. So anyway, that's it for lecture day on the Israelites in India. So later I'm going to post this lecture, of course, to my YouTube channel. So if you have any comments, questions, let me know about it. If it's anything else about the class, whatever, just email me to my email address, which you already have. So y'all have a good weekend coming up. I'll have some other lectures, like I said, up next week as well. So take care.